Bam.
I'm Ofra Graicer, talking to you from Tel Aviv, Israel. I work in the IDF General's course. I've done many other things that we're going to talk about. And this is the Break It Down show.
Yes, it is. These I love to bring these kind of episodes because one, I didn't know who Ofra was before Grant introduced her, so I'm going to let Grant talk about her in a second here. But we're going to talk about really high-end thought processes for the military and how we, and I'm going to say this, how we include design thinking into military decision making. And I just think this is going to be a fascinating topic. Grant, why don't you tee us up and get us started?
Yeah, so I met Ofra in person in Toronto. I think it was 2015, maybe 16. Somewhere around there, 16 at in Toronto, the Canadian Forces College. But I had heard of Ofra before that, and I think if you had done any study of the military design movement up to that point, you would have heard of her. So well known in the military design realm, I would say, especially those that are well read. But shared a glass of wine with her at dinner amongst all the folks that were there at the time, and we were attempting to help the Canadian Forces College get into this applying design thinking to the military and military operations and planning, and I really I met a kindred spirit. I thought a lot of her ideas were fascinating, and her personality is really really attractive, and for free thinkers and people that want to think out of the box and that sort of thing. So I since then have kind of maintained a email and Zoom relationship with her, but I did get to bump into her in Budapest as well on another military design thinking event, and so I really thought it would be great to have her on, because no matter every time I've been with her or listening to her on Zoom or even just emailing, there's always something interesting, sometimes controversial, usually controversial, which is interesting, and I think that's really where design thinking should go. It shouldn't be just putting everybody to sleep. I think Ofra would agree with that. But so I wanted to start out by asking Ofra to just tell us a little bit about herself, her background, and her life, early life, I guess, and introduce herself to the crowd.
I was born somewhere in the analog world, as we said, when the Bee Gees. I'll give you a clue: when the Bee Gees and Olivia Newton-John and Saturday Night Fever were like that. That was pop culture, and I lived a very nice life by the beach in Tel Aviv, which is very reminiscent of Los Angeles, where I also lived for a couple of years studying film. And as the Israeli, I was a conscript. I joined the military. I trained snipers, which was great. That's also when I learned that some differences between men and women, and what it takes to be a soldier. There are so many ways we can take this conversation. And after the military, I did my like any Israeli who's out of the military, when traveling Central America, South America, Carnival in Brazil. They canceled the Carnival in Brazil this year because of the floods. And then my brother said, well, there is a film department starting in the Academy of Art in San Francisco. Come to study film. I said, great. So I was a couple of years in California. And then the Oslo agreements took place in Israel. Suicide bombings, Palestinians just went off. So I returned from La La Land, which I really loved, in Los Angeles, and began my military design career, which I'm still upholding. Although, Grant, after your presentation, I think my work here is done and I should go. But I've been working in the IDF, and I've been working in other militaries around the world. I welcome these opportunities to meet other cultures, other interests, other challenges. And if I would say one more thing about me, is that I had this conversation with my friends, my colleague, about my age. We have kids. My eldest is going next year to the military himself. And people, people are fed up with work and with their career. And I told them, listen, every day the past 20 years that I went to work doing design, I always welcomed work. I always wanted to go to work. So I hope that will be the case for the future as well.
I want to ask the first question after I told Grant he can go crazy. So when I hear about design thinking, and I've done a bunch of interviews with people in the Silicon Valley, and it breaks my brain. Like, it aggravates me because it's so antithetical to how I think about things. But I also understand how powerful it is. So there's that aspect. I want to layer this next part in here. I read Prime Minister Netanyahu's book recently, and it really opened my eyes to the time that what it is to be Israeli and how long this has been, your guys' country. And when you look at the American forces, we have things like snipers, and we have an amphibious C-130 now. And I'm like, what is all this crap that we have, right? You could be a sniper in the American forces and never snipe anything. I actually had Tim Kennedy on the show. Here's like this, ultimate alpha badass SF sniper guy, but I know better. And I'm like, yeah, but how often do you actually snipe anything? It's like, well, there's observation too. Like, that's looking through binoculars at an enemy. That's not like sniping. But in Israel, it's different because you guys have all these mini wars. You have things like suicide bombers and trying to navigate these very complex social and military campaigns. And so you can't have frivolous things like snipers who literally never snipe anything, or intel assets, like in my world on the spy side, who have no field experience and never have the opportunity to do it, and never develop the kind of expertise it takes to go across the fence and go live amongst Egyptians or Palestinians and collect openly and actively. Oh my gosh. So when you look at design thinking in terms of how Americans would apply it and then how the Israeli forces would apply it, help me sort that out. What's the difference there?
The first one I would say, and that will take us back to the Canadians for a moment. I saw that General Petraeus has a book coming up called Conflict. Now, for Israeli, when I get up in the morning, it's conflict. I mean, this morning, let's take this morning, for example, it's 6 p.m. here, but this morning, 6 rockets from Gaza. We have a dozen Palestinian terrorists in Nablus in an operation overnight, killed deliberately. We had attacks in Syria 2 days ago. We attacked some Iranian targets, Hezbollah ammunition. We had Israeli ship in the Gulf being targeted. So this is just a regular day. I mean, Israel is just everything you could imagine on steroids. Even our politics we do on steroids. And everything is also in an accelerated pace. So if you ask me what is the first challenge in doing design, and probably we'll talk about what it means to do design, but first challenge to do design in any other place other than Israel, or a place that lives conflict, existentially lives conflict, is just having the motivation to do so, to change anything. Because we are all creatures of stability. We want to do the same thing. Not me, I hate it, but I mean, in general, most of us, want to have expectations. We don't want things change every day. And when you do design, it's about revolutionizing what you've done thus far. It's about destruction to create, like late John Boyd said. It's about going to the dark side, like Yoda said. Okay, so in that sense, my need to explain conflict to other militaries, like the Canadians, was the first obstacle in motivating them to change the way they think.
I think that's a good segue, Pete, to ask Ofra to give her, 2-minute maybe or 1-minute spiel on what is. So a lot of people that are listening probably have never heard of design, or they haven't heard of the military using design, and it's different. If you're talking in the corporate world, you might be talking human-centric design. So real quick, what's Ofra's take on military design?
So I would say maybe 2.5 things about design. You're more than welcome to explore the materials that I have on the website, both videos and written ones. But Design, first and foremost, much like architecture, much like other forms of art, is about bringing form and function together. Now, it sounds very simple, but logic is totally abstract. Form is totally tangible. It's operating in the physical world. And these things, the abstract and the concrete, don't come together easily. It's a question of how to mediate tensions between these two, how to bring those two languages together. They are totally different languages. Now, when you're talking abstract, when you're talking politics, think about your politicians. They can say whatever they want. They don't need to check statistics. They don't need to vet what they're saying. They can just say, I want something done, find a way to do it. Okay? And then they send the little people to go and figure out how to actually do it. Okay. The tangible world brings its own challenges. So that's one thing. Okay. That's a function. Now, that's a form, sorry. Now, the function as well. I mean, if we're talking about generals, think about those who are in the top of the pyramid. Think about those who are running systems. Okay. We expect them to be the explorers, always looking at uncharted waters. So there's no one to give them answers there. So also in the logical part of this equation, logic and form and function, they have their own challenges, paradoxes, things that they need to figure out what to do with. So one design is just bringing the abstract logic, the theory, the strategy. Strategy is pure logic, by the way, if you thought something else. And the operations, which is purely physics, kinetic world. Now, cyber world maybe cyber is a little different, but still, it's us managing to do something in the actual place where it can hurt stuff, people, infrastructure, and so on. So that's one thing about design, just bringing the abstract and the concrete together. The other one, which I find more interesting, is that when we try to understand reality as a system, okay, bring all the players and the trends and the interests, strategic interests, political interests, our allies, our rivals in one coherent system, there are things that don't match, okay? So we need to find a way. It's not to bridge a gap. You cannot bridge the gap between a mountain and the river. You can only bridge two riverbanks, okay? Because they're of the same kind. So design, military design, strategic design, security design is about bringing all these elements together in a way that makes sense, although they're not of the same making. And this is crazy shit to do. And there is no algorithm that can do it other than the human one.
And so to me, that begs the question, could you go back a little bit? And you mentioned that you started getting into the design world. What was the story? Why were you attracted to design? How did you get involved with design? I mean, I know, to me, it makes sense. You were studying in filmmaking, and then you go in the military. So it sort of makes sense a little bit, but how, I'm sure there's a story there, how you got involved in military design.
It is so bizarre, thinking back about it. I was a film major, okay? I don't have my degree. I still have the final project to do. But I was a film major. When I got back to Israel, our television industry was still in its infancy, only 2 channels. Now it's crazy. We have Faudas and Teherans and, all these series, but it wasn't like that then. I could only be the water girl. If you don't even have that on film sites in anywhere else other than Israel. It's just a job of someone that's bringing water to the workers. Anyway, I went to find the quickest degree I could do to start having a job. The quickest academic degree I could do was political science. I could do it in 2 years, got my bachelor's degree, realized that I didn't learn anything. And if there is one thing I could say about political science, that science it is not. So a friend of mine said, well, listen, I'm looking into master's degrees in the university, and there is something called security studies program. And it seems interesting. It's about politics and strategy and philosophy. It looks interesting. I said, fine, because, I only spent 2 years in Tel Aviv University. So we went in, And turned out that this person who pioneered the military design movement, Brigadier General Shimon Naveh, he taught about 60% of the program. And while I was his student, and he's a crazy guy, Grant, you met him. You appreciated him as a student, as a participant in design courses. He's a phenomenon in itself. He hasn't written much. There are not many videos of him. Some of them actually in the JSOW channels, so you can look him up. But what was extraordinary about this guy? Now, this guy is a Israeli general, a paratrooper to the core. His wife was the dean of architecture in Tel Aviv University. She started the gender studies movement. So their house was very, it was all over the place as far as theory and philosophy go. And on one of these classes, he was teaching us about the Napoleon Wars and the 1812 campaign to Russia and why the French lost, which was the only case that Napoleon really lost. And the end game of it, I'm saving you a very long story. Read War and Peace by Tolstoy, and you'll have it just 1,600 pages, and you know what I'm talking about. It was all about him, Shimon Naveh, saying this sentence, saying, well, us Westerners need to go from A to B. We need a direction. We need a very clear directive. We need to know what we're doing. Russians are not like that. Russians move in space. Russians are their mind is a lot more fluid, and they have a general idea of what they want to do and how they want to do, and not even that. And it just blew my mind. I don't think it is resonating right now in the way I'm expressing it. But for me, it was like there was a way to think like Western, and there was a way to think that is not Western. Now, I've read Sun Tzu, and I've read Lao Tse, and I've seen all the Star Wars movies, but it never translated back into strategy and operations the way it did in this course. So I finished my master's degree, and he asked me to come and work in the IDF. And I thought, well, and write a PhD, and I thought, okay, that's what happened.
You're talking about the philosophy and the logic part of combat and conflict in the military, and I'm thinking about like at the very bottom level, it for sure is philosophical how I approach things. There's a philosophy to it, and a lot of it has nothing to do with me. It's understanding the nature of Russians. I'm reading John Hooper's you can't see that, but John Hooper's The Italians, right? And he talks about how like the word veritas, that veris is truth, but it's also your interpretation of it. And like literally in the what's her name, Amanda Cox, in that case where that girl, the American girl, was convicted and then unconvicted of murder, the judge says, this is the judge talking on the record, like, we'll never know the real truth, and the real truth is probably different than the actual truth, because there's just no truth can be a performance for an Italian, right? So you have all these different elements, and when you're on the ground, for me, I'm trying to balance the reality of a colonel like Grant and trying to service him and give him the things he needs to be able to win, but also translate what it's like to be a Russian or what it's like to be an Italian and what's going on. And that has nothing to do with the strategic stuff that's going on way up top. And so I'm almost working in spite of that strategy because I don't know how to feed that strategy with the reality on the ground. Those two things, they just don't go together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, first, I'll be modest in saying that empires, and the first time I saw an empire strike wasn't in a film. It was when I was I was visiting the Unified Quest, the big U.S. Army annual war game. Okay, I've actually seen it happen. I understood where George Lucas did these films. So I will be modest by saying the bigger the military apparatus, the more you're going to get away from thinking and looking at the world like a tactician and thinking and looking at the world like the chief of the general staff, and even the prime minister. Okay, so this is one thing. Israel is still in just by sheer size, it's a very small, it's a very small country geographically. We are 10 million people, and about only a quarter of them serve in the military at some time of in their life because of the heterogeneity of our society. So one thing is that we all know each other. Privates will know their commanders. Commanders will know probably the parents of the privates. We know everyone. I mean, I'm 2 degrees of separation from the prime minister. Okay, and sometimes it was just 1 degree, and I'm just nobody. So this is one thing. We don't need to, to fill such a big gap. Okay, so many degrees of separation like the one you're describing. And since most of us been in the military, all our politicians have experienced that. And sometimes they will have a lot of war experience as well. So the gap isn't so big in that sense. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are a very heterogeneous society. Now, we have Russians in the military, obviously, because we had 1.5 million Jews emigrating from Soviet Union after it collapsed. Okay, so there is a huge Russian or Russian-speaking population in the IDF. There are many Arabs in the IDF. There are ultra-Orthodox in the IDF. There are Druze in the IDF. So it's funny. There are Persians, okay, Jews who came from Persia. So they speak Iranian. So we have, for better or for worse, in the context that we have to operate in the world, we have these representatives in our society. We have them in intelligence. We have them in operations. We had at the beginning of the civil war in Syria. We still have the military. It was regulars on the border. It was an armored division, and they were still, thinking of the Syrian military, of their special forces and their corps, their armored corps, and how this would play out like the 80s and the 90s according to Soviet doctrine. But when the war erupted, we had ISIS on the border, we had jihadists on the borders, and it took some time to understand what was going on, because suddenly we didn't see military. There was no form to it. And one of the company commanders on the borders doing patrol, he was the censor that saw something that brought it back. Now, since the IDF is such an informal gathering, for better or for worse, the fact that it was a 25-year-old, a 26-year-old, junior commander didn't matter. The division commander gave him the time of day to explain what he saw and work on his instincts. And from that developed a huge operation, humanitarian, intelligence, and some other aspect that I cannot talk about. But that's also part of the story. And I think if I may comment on the US military, of what I've seen a couple of years ago, we were doing some training in Vicenza in Italy with one of your brigades. And it was the first time that I've seen this heterogeneity in the US military that I haven't seen before. So I think that also adds to a good discourse about where we should go.
Ofra, you had mentioned Shimon Naveh, and talk a little bit about him when you first met him. Everybody's got a Shimon Naveh story, at least one, and I want to share mine with you real quick. So I had never met him in person. I had talked to him and emailed him, but he was giving a lecture at Special Operations Command under the J5 folks. And I think this was 2012, maybe. So I registered for the course just so I could go and meet him. His lecture was like 2 hours, but it was full of stories. And so the main theme, I think, of his stories were examples throughout history of people who had different types of thinking, breakthrough types of thinking, when they were faced with complex problems. And he talked about T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. He talked about Wiedemeyer, who helped write the victory plan for World War II. But when he got to Don Starry, so General Don Starry helped develop the air-land battle concept in the 80s for the U.S. military, late 70s, 80s, and that was somewhat, used as a good thing that helped us win the Cold War. This concept called air-land battle. Well, he mentions Don Starry, and he looks around, and from the look of everyone, there were people that didn't know who Don Starry was. And I'm sure in his mind he's thinking, I'm an Israeli and I know who Don Starry is. I'm talking to Americans and they don't even know who he is. And so he looks at the front row, and there was a officer, I think she might have been finance, so probably not heavily interested in combat history. And he says, "You don't know who Don Starry is?" And she says, "No." And he says, and he didn't really necessarily look at her, but he looked at everybody. He said, "You call yourselves professionals?" I think he threw a cuss word in there too. But I mean, that was Shimon Naveh. I'm wondering, do you have any funny Naveh stories? And how did you first meet him and get involved with him? How was that?
So as I said, I was a student. For sure, he cussed, by the way, when he said whatever he said. It looks like he suffers from a Tourette syndrome. I mean, just get him going, and it's you need to put a stop to it. Shimon needs to always be the smartest person in the room. The problem is that he's usually the smartest person in the room. So as long as you know that you lost that battle from the beginning, you're going to get along. Great storyteller, as you said, and a genius in his own field. I mean, not many people can say that, they started a movement, like a philosophical movement, an applied philosophy movement, and made a difference. But by the way, his path wasn't so easy, and he has been admired as much as he's been rejected. So it's not necessarily, the Cinderella story that we could expect. I've been trying for years to get him to get there is kind of a defense award in Israel, and I can't do that because he has too many enemies. But back to what I can tell about myself. I said I was a student, and he was teaching about 60% of the course. But there were smart people in the room other than myself. I mean, and Shimon is both a feminist. Again, I think it's part of it is his wife and his great daughters. So he's both a feminist, but he's also an alpha male. So that's like a tension. There is a mix there. It's not very easy to cross. I'm sure it helped that I held M14s and knew how to shoot them, but it was M14s. Thank you that the Vietnam War was over and we got all the leftovers. So at one point, almost to the end of our master's degree, and people were approaching him because people wanted to come and work for him in the military. And I didn't even think in that direction. I was doing some public work. I had all kinds of interests. I'm very jumpy in that sense. And they were supposed to have this conference on the Operation Barbarossa, okay, 1941, World War II. People were coming from all over the world. And this Israeli was supposed to present a paper on the operational art and Plan Barbarossa. And the guy, I don't even remember why, the guy chickened out at the last moment. That was like 2 days before the conference. And there was a big hole in the program. It was like, it wasn't the keynote, but it was a big hole in the program. So he comes to the students and was like, I don't think he even approached a guy. And he said, well, I need a filler here. You need to be up to speed on it in like 2 days, and you need to deliver a paper on Operation Barbarossa and operational art. And the guy was like, are you crazy? I mean, moved away, And I was like, well, I can do it. So I don't know. I've done it. I mean, I know a lot about Operation Barbarossa right now. I brought Napoleon in 1812. I mean, where you start telling the story and the history and the after effects of it, and Condoleezza Rice, everyone was in it, in that presentation. And at the end, there was a retired Russian general who spoke. He was like 90, he spoke nothing but Russian. And he came to me and he gave me a rose. And he said, you can come and be the chief of defense staff in Russia anytime you understand operational art. So that's how it started. I guess that's where he thought maybe it's a good idea to bring me to the military. I don't know. I mean, I really didn't expect that. And it's just, opportunities come.
And then, so I know you know about a lot of the controversy, and I'd like you to comment a little bit about, from an outsider's perspective, especially on the U.S. But you've seen it in the Canadian military and probably in some of the other militaries that we've dealt with. But the controversy around design. I mean, you throw two U.S. Army officers into a room and you ask them any kind of question. What is strategy, or how should we, fight the Russians, or whatever, and you're gonna be there all day and nobody's gonna agree with anything. But design, to me, has resulted in a different type of, it's a really nasty, and I think the response, it seems to be very polarizing, more than anything else I've encountered. I mean, when we were debating women in the military, I don't remember people getting this upset that like they do with design. And you get two officers in a room and you throw the word design at them. And I mean, it's so polarizing. I think some of it's because of philosophy and some of it's our culture. But I mean, I had a boss tell me that I was disloyal to the entire regiment for saying the word design. I had a general who was in charge of the school where I learned design tell us we couldn't use the word or use the method. I've been a part of colonels telling each other that they're idiots when the subject of design came up. And I mean, it just blows my mind that there's this such controversy. And when I tried to get Shimon Naveh up to discuss his systemic operational design to the instructors of the Special Forces course, my boss said, no way, no one, hell no, because that lost the second intifada. So we're definitely not having that come up here. I mean, so, I'm just curious your take on why is it so controversial? And it just seemed, it's flabbergasting to me how controversial it is and polarizing of an issue it is. I suspect there's some, deep-seated philosophical things going on, but what is your take on it?
So I'll say something very shallow and profound at the same time, because we don't have a long time, but there is depth behind it, okay? Design, it's no coincidence that design feels a lot more comfortable in the environment of special operations, because it's about doing something unique. It's about doing something in context. You cannot repeat it. Probably if you repeat it, you're going to fail or going to die. And it has to do with the discourse of otherness, understanding other people. You always find yourself, again, I'm making generalizations about special operations. It's more about Green Beret maybe than counterinsurgency, but still you will find yourself operating in totally different environments over a period of time, definitely in several tours, and you'll have to invent yourself every time. So this is why, one, design is more comfortable there. I've seen special operators in even junior ones almost gladly embracing that language, that approach, because it made sense. It was intuitive to them. And then I gave them a framework to think about it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, we all know how the establishment think about special forces and special operations. You need them when you cannot use your big machine, but once the war is over, you put them back where they belong. Otherwise, they're going to make the entire institution special. And this is really hard to manage. I've written about it in my book. It's in PDF. You can go and read it, okay? So this is one thing. It's one thing. I mean, design is not something that you can manage. Design is not something you can control. You know where you begin, you don't know where you end. Commanders don't like that. Politicians don't like that. Certainly in the US military, where most of the junior officers in the regular forces go through West Point and learn engineering, this is just the opposite of what they're expected to do, okay? So this is one thing. I mean, we don't like, I mean, if designers are agents of chaos, then the big establishment doesn't like chaos, okay? It's not that. So that's one thing. The second thing is that design, again, for us, when I'm saying design, I'm talking about ASOD, I'm talking about the IDF, I'm talking about Shimon Naveh and his legacy, okay? Because you'll read other things about design that have been watered down, okay? So for us, design and strategy, because we do design to come up with a new strategy in context and then come out with the operations that support it, okay? So design and strategy go together, but it's about revolutions. Now, Grant, I'm sure you remember this event in Toronto when there was this really cute, not cute, nice, because I'm translating from Hebrew, sorry, really nice Canadian professor from the international relations. He was doing humanitarian work as well, and he was like aid and humanitarian aid, and he was talking about peaceful, something about liberation, because it was in Africa, and these peaceful transitions. And it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, everybody's like half asleep, and then I heard peaceful liberation, and I just go berserk, because I'm like, what are you talking about? Liberation is war. Liberation is about conflict. You unshackle. And he didn't understand what happened, because, you know, it was this polite academic, you know, gathering. He was reading from his paper. And I just attacked. Now, there were Colombians in the rooms as well, and they totally identified with what I was saying. So this is the second thing, okay? Design products are about revolution. They're about destruction, as I said. They're about letting go of your assets. Now, if generals are doing design, I tell them, I say it also in my TED Talk, everything that you amass this experience from the tactical world, from the warfighting world, from the engineering world, and you need to leave it out the door, because once you start doing design, there are no rules. So everything you've known doesn't serve you anymore. On the contrary, it's your shackles, like the Matrix. It's a prison of your own mind. So that's the third reason why people don't want to do design. It's about revolution. And I'm not talking about the revolution in the Chinese sense. I'm not talking about revolution in the Soviet sense. I'm talking about revolution in the liberal sense, if we can say it. It's not about evolution. And every time that I'm hearing CEOs or whatever saying that we're going to do something, we have a new strategy and it's adaptive, I'm like, why bother? I mean, if you can adapt, just do optimization to whatever you're doing, but don't change everything around your assumptions, your organization, your structures of thinking, your forms of operation. Don't change everything if it doesn't need to be destroyed. So that's the other reason why people don't want to or don't like to do in design. And the last one is because it's hard. Doing design is hard because there's no one to tell you if you're getting it right or not.
This is what I wanted to ask you about, because a lot of what I do is I go out and there'll be a military operation. We're going to go inoculate goats. We're going to go paint something. We're going to go hand out soccer balls, right? And when you brief this operation, success, everything worked. People love us now. But if I go back 5 days later and I start talking to people and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you guys are still the same dudes you were 5 days ago. Like, there's no difference. And so when you start to put the mirror up to the commander and say, hey, what you're being briefed on in terms of success, because absolutely people went out and handed out soccer balls, but we don't know what happened afterwards. And I know this drives Grant a little crazy, but I talk about affect over effect. And so what is the emotional response in the populace from what you just did, whether it's launching a rocket or whatever it's going to be? There is a reaction to that. And understanding that affective reaction is as important as anything else in the commander's goals to accomplish their mission. But we don't ever send anybody out to go look at these things. And that's what made me valuable to a commander, is I'm telling them all the way up to like the general staff level, hey, this doesn't work here. So I went out and I studied the sons of Iraq. And the Americans had this belief that this was a fantastically successful program. And oh no, what happens when we shut it down? And I went around and I'm talking to the actual sons of Iraq, and they have no ammo, or the ammo was in a house 100 yards down the road. Nobody took them seriously. But we didn't know that because we had believed we built this incredible security force. The reality is nobody wanted those dudes to have weapons at all in the communities. And so that allowed me to say, hey, this may not be that big of a deal as it shuts down, because there was a lot of belief that it would destabilize the region. The region actually wasn't stable. So it wasn't going to actually add to or detract from the stability because they were doing things in spite of those guys. But it took someone to be on the ground to determine that. And it was not a comfortable reality for a lot of people. Even without going out, they would fight me on like, no, that's not what's going on. I've read the reports and I'm like, I just talked to a dude 8 days ago. I can go talk to dudes any day of the week and they're going to say the same thing over and over again because these guys aren't a credible force. So I don't want to get into my story, but I think that illustrates what you're talking about with design and what we believe and what's available to change that evolution, that revolution that you're talking about. I get that, but it is very uncomfortable when you bring that reality to someone that this, what you think is working, is absolutely not working.
So I'll say, I'm a Jew. I always have more than one thing to say, but I'll say, and sometimes they will be contradictory, but I'll say two things about that. One is that when we design a strategy and then we design the operation that supports it or that complements it, we know that it's going to fail. Now it sounds stupid what I'm saying. Yes, we because we do something that there are no guarantees, right? We're trying to get the proximity of our understanding of reality. It's totally subjective. There is no way to monitor or indicate if it's going to work or not. It's just about operating and see where it goes. So we are operating under the assumption that it is going to fail. So the question is not if it is going to fail or not. The question is how fast are we going to reframe what we've done so we get a second round at it, and then probably at the second time we're going to get in closer proximity to where we want to go. Again, a big direction, not a point, a center of gravity that we want to have, okay? So this is one thing. And so one, we know we're going to fail. We know we're going to keep repeating it and getting better at it. It's very Sisyphic. And the second thing is that hopefully we're going to understand faster than the enemy. Okay, so because us and the enemy are operating, it doesn't matter if they started or we started together, like the engagement, the strategic engagement, something is going on. Both sides are trying to make sense. As long as my side, the blue side, is making sense faster than my rival, I will be in an advantage. So it's just about getting the confidence in, I know what I'm doing, even if I didn't get it right, I didn't get the strategy right, I didn't get my interests sharp, okay? I didn't operationally, the forms of operation the forms of warfare that I came up with, they didn't deliver. Okay, I know, I see it. I'm on it, I'm on the ball, and I'm going to try something different, but I'm going to do it faster than it's relative, okay? To be fast is just relative to what your enemy is doing at that time, okay? So this is one answer, okay? It's not about getting it right or wrong. It's just getting it and do it all over again. And it's an OODA loop, but a little different one, okay? The second thing that I would say that once you start doing design, you have to change your understanding of what risk management is. You need to re-identify how you think of risk. For example, a very tiny example, okay? When ISIS started operating in the Middle East, in our region, it had nothing to do with us. It was in Iraq, it was between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and Israel, for a change, was out of the conversation. Now, Shimon and I were sitting in our room, we're reading the news, open sources, nothing else. And we're like, okay, something is going on. Couple hundred kilometers from us, something is going on there. We need to see what it is about and how it affects us. Now, the commandant of the course was like, this is far, this is not us. We have other priorities, when it's not about that. Let's wait and see how it unfolds. And we were like, no, the further it is from us, the smaller investment we'll have to do in trying to figure out what it is and mitigate it. The closer it comes to us, it has shape. So now we have more, we know what it is, but it's going to hit us. It's going to be lethal, and it's going to involve more forces and more fatalities. So where's the greater risk? Okay, operating a small unit, a small team, further from Israel, with no lines, of communication, or waiting it to be on our borders and have a full-scale operation. Where's the risk? So part of our discussion about design is to change your appreciation of what is risk.
All right, I want to jump in here real quick. Okay, so one of the things I've learned from my time in combat is that you have to identify where the work is, right? And to do that, you have to do an OODA loop type thing. I'd like to adjust OODA loop to be DAOO, so a DAO loop, where you decide, act, and then observe, and then orient yourself to what you've learned. Because what we tend to do is we go in and we spin around like the Tasmanian devil and do all this stuff. Meanwhile, the entire environment is moving slowly. And so then we leave, and then a new Tasmanian devil comes in and spins around and does a bunch of stuff. And they repeat the same process with complete amnesia as to what happened, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, doesn't even exist. And so the commander comes in and says, I know what to do. I've been trained. I've been reading all these books for years. And they do the exact same pattern as they did 10 units before, right? And so each time we come in and we try to iterate faster than anybody else, and you can't slow down to realize that if you just did less stuff, you would fuck up less. And by fucking up less, you would improve your performance. And so quit inserting yourself and adding all this OODA looping energy and slow down. And we don't have the ability to see that our speed and our need to do effects, our need to do things. Let's do 55 things this year, and we're really going to make a difference. We're going to build this building. And I go back and like, there are 4 schools you guys built that nobody is in. Stop building schools. I know you're laughing, right? Because you get it. But it is really hard to get a commander to listen to that. It takes me months to get them to go, we're going to do less stuff. We're just going to do less stuff. And sometimes by doing nothing. And I'll tell this real quick story because it turns out I have a little bit of Jewishness in me too. I found out through some ancestry. There was going to be this festival, and in Afghanistan, I was talking to the governor about it. I'm like, we'll do nothing, we'll do everything. What do you want us to do? He's like, I'd like you guys to stay away from it completely. And I'm like, so you're going to pull off this festival and bring people to the government center, and we don't have to do anything? That's right. Can I observe? He's like, I wish you wouldn't, but yeah, if you want to, you can. I'm like, no, that's all right. Can we bring anything? He's like, you know what? You guys can be my guests. You can bring some water, but ultimately, if you stay away, that's the best thing. So I'm briefing the commander, and he's like, this is great. I've just won something, and I don't have to do anything. Let me know anytime I can do nothing and win. And so we did. We did nothing. And the party happened, and everything was good. And then I could go back out into the community, and I could say, hey, what happened at the government center? Then it'd be like, oh, man, they threw the best party. It was like the first time we had a positive connection to the government, and we did nothing. Our OODA loop was smashed in that case. It's like, don't do anything. Observe. Hey, we don't have to do anything. And then, okay, we'll do nothing as often as possible, and we'll continue to go forward. Not in every case. This stuff's all delicate, and you have to move deliberately. But doing nothing was the right answer in that case.
So again, two anecdotes. One, you said do nothing, and that's the Lao say, right? To do nothing and everything gets done. Now, let's try to practice it. In the IDF, the reservists have, they have weight. Okay, they hold the organizational memory of the institution. They have the experience. Sometimes it's not just about the combat experience; it's also about the life experience. And even when I train snipers, sometimes I would have a reservist course of snipers. Now, they would operate under a totally different code. I would be this busy bee coming, wake them up at like 4:30 in the morning because we want to shoot before sunlight, and get ready and be prepared. And they would be just these lazy, appear to be, yes, these lazy people, who have that don't look like soldiers. They have long hair, and it's like, oh, take it easy, drink coffee, it's okay, we have time. How many bullets do we need to shoot? We'll shoot them, don't worry, it's okay. And I didn't realize what it meant until Shimon came with all these stories about, again, Lebanon, and again, in our big wars, we have regulars, we have the reservists, and we have the career officers, and they're all fighting together. Now, they don't always mix. So sometimes the brigade would have the regular, let's say a regular regiment, and then they would have a reservist regiment. Now, the reservists could be people in their 30s, maybe even early 40s if they continue to volunteer. And the regulars are in their 20s, and their officers maybe in their early 30s. Now, take the hill. Reservists go from that side, regulars, you go from that side, just your tactics. And Shimon would tell these stories how he, as a regular officer, as a regular platoon commander, would fight all his way to the top, and lose soldiers and work hard. And then he'll arrive at the top, and then he'll see the reservists, and they didn't fire a bullet, and they got there first. And they did it easy. Why? Because they stopped and they thought and they looked and they observed and they found an alternative way to do it. So this is also something that I keep repeating, at least in my design teams when I work. It's like, be lazy. Don't start filling the boards. Think for a minute, reflect, find your motivation, don't rush, don't go through the motion. It's not going to make any sense. So that's something else. Glad that you brought it up. Just be lazy.
Well, one of the things that we argue about over here a lot, and you mentioned political science is not a science. I was a political science major, and I have to agree with you. But one thing that Pete and I have talked a lot about is when we were in Afghanistan, there just seemed to be a lot of things that didn't make sense. And Pete just gave you some examples. And one of the things that is debated a lot here is, well, we did design over in Afghanistan, and nothing got better. And then the response back from a lot of folks, our buddy Ben Zweibelson will say, well, we did MDMP, or the joint planning process, a lot, and what it did help. And so there's this argument that I think sort of is missing the point, and it kind of goes back to your political science comment, which is political science, or the study of politics, is not like physics. So when you get done with a physics experiment, you can repeat it and you can control the variables, and you'll pretty much know how fast the car goes down the road, right? But you can't do that with politics. Number one, you can't do repeat experiments. You can play with the numbers a little bit if you're doing statistical analysis, but it's not the same, right? You're studying people, and people are different the next time you put them on the road, unlike a car, right? And so there's this debate that I think is missing the point. You do design or you do MDMP, and did it win? Did it result in anything great? And I think, and there's a lot of design people that I think say they use that language. If you use design, it'll be better. And I wonder if what's your comment on that? Because I think it's missing the point. I don't think you're going to get definitively better results from design necessarily. That's not the purpose of choosing design over something else. I don't know. What do you think?
A couple of things. The first one is that all over the years that I've been doing design, and remember that in the IDF, Shimon made a deliberate choice early on in the 90s that he's only instructing design to generals, to general officers. This is very, very different from teaching design to planners and expecting them to do sometimes both design and planning, and expecting them, being juniors, to offer a deliverable to a general who haven't been a part of this conversation, when we know that they are going to come up with something completely different than was envisaged at the beginning. So it's kind of like where you employ design, sometimes just in the question of who does it and who you do it with, can say if it's going to work or not. So that's one thing. We've been doing it with generals, and so they can close the circle of accountability. You see, they have their team. Yes, they have their staff or their peers or their friends, they will talk with and do this design inquiry. But at the end of the day, they're also in charge of running the operation. So they don't have anyone to blame. It's going, if they're employing design, they're going to take accountability for it. So that's one thing. It's a choice that we made, okay? The second one is that for sure design, and this is all our graduates said that over the years, design changed them as people, as individuals, as persons. It doesn't mean necessarily that it changes the system. Maybe something completely different needs to happen there. And maybe the system cannot absorb design as an idea like planning. It's not a coincidence that some of the planning can be replaced by automation. Design cannot be replaced by automation. So this is the second thing. I can vouch 100% by saying that people who study design, employ design, are changed, are transformed as individuals. But does it mean that the system is doing better? That I don't know. That I would be more modest. Okay, so that is the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say about the effect of design on the institution, the organization, and the country. You see, one of the most successful design stories that we have in the IDF is the disengagement campaign in 2005. Now, that was a successful operation done through design against the blue side, against Israeli settlers who were in the Gaza Strip, but were there, the government, by government approval. They lived there for years. And at some point, the Prime Minister then, Ariel Sharon, decided that we are disengaging from Gaza. So it was a very successful design operation. I mean, it is only, I need to convince the general who ran it, Gershon Cohen, to publish it also in English. And he can explain, he can actually explain all the design phases that brought him to this. When I'm saying successful operations, mean that there wasn't fatalities on the Israeli side, because there were clashes, okay? It wasn't pleasant. You took 13,000 settlers out of their homes. You trashed the neighborhoods. You left nothing behind. The Palestinians didn't want anything behind. So everything was gone. In like 5 days. People lived there for 30 years and it was gone back for 5 days. So it could have ended totally differently. It ended in a good way, again, with no fatalities because he employed design. But I think he hasn't recovered personally from this success after that. It was a tragedy. Okay, so I think that the third reason why we don't have so many testimonials when it comes to design is because the success in design is a little more tricky in the after effects of it. Okay, I said dark side, I said morality, I said many things. If you do design properly, if you went against the institution, if you went against the organization, if you operated on your side a little, if you disrupted your system, maybe you don't want to say it out loud. A lot of it has to do with manipulation and doing some information operations, not just on your enemy, but also on your side to make it an operation successful. Because 75% of the disruption needs to be on your side. So I think that's the last reason why you wouldn't necessarily hear about design stories, because they're not, it's a different kind of courage. It's a different kind of medal. You probably wouldn't get it.
Do we have time for one more, or are we out of time, Pete?
I have time for one more. Do you, Ofra?
One more.
Okay.
I wanted to, I can talk about design all day long, but I'm curious if Ofra wanted to comment on anything, either worldwide, globally, or especially maybe even in the U.S. side, that she finds particularly interesting today. Contemporary things. We've got our Ukraine response. We've got our internal domestic issues. We've got this new concept in the U.S. military called the competition continuum. That's our new buzzword. It's even in our doctrine already. We've been trying to do that pivot to the Pacific, I think, for like 10 years, and I don't know if we're successful, but we're going to pivot our attention away from the Middle East to China or something. Anything about stuff that's going on from the U.S. side or globally that you'd like to just say, this makes no sense to me, or
well, that merits a new podcast. I think one of the things I had to talk today earlier this morning with a capstone, the U.S. military capstone course, which is the kind of like the general's course of the U.S. military. And I was just teasing them with all kinds of ideas and trying to, again, being the agent provocateur, trying to provoke them with all kinds of thinking. And I think where I think they felt most uncomfortable was this concept of going to the dark side, and that there could be moral relativity, and I mentioned what I read lately on Seymour Hersh, the story, did the U.S. blow up the Nord Stream pipeline or not? And obviously, if you can think about, if you can contemplate it, it could be done. So Seymour Hersh, what he said was that Biden chose to have Germany cold this winter, something like that. Now, for him, I guess when he said that, that was like, how morally low can you get, to get your ally, to get its citizen cold this winter? And I was like, hell, if that was the thinking, then that's a step in the right direction for the U.S., being able to play the moral game, being more Russian, being more Chinese, have more than one face to show. So this is kind of like, I think we wouldn't have a chance. I want the West to win, where we're getting, to the end of the podcast. I want the West to win. I don't care if there are multiple truths out there. I know my core truths. I know my core values. But in order to operate in chaos, you need to be able to do everything. And you need to be able to shift, your images. So had it happened or had it not happened, I hope you're contemplating things like that. I know you've been doing it on the Israelis. So I hope the West wins. And I hope the US wins. It's going to be one in our corner.
Anything in closing, Grant? Do you have anything you want to say?
No, I think we have to have Ofra back on again. We didn't have enough time. But thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, Pete, for allowing us to come on, because to me, a lot of this stuff is fascinating. It's fascinating to hear it from outside of the U.S. a point of view.
Anything in closing, Ofra?
Oh, I've spoken so much. It's time to. If I had imagined that this virtual whiskey shot that I'm gonna celebrate with right now. But next time I want it to be offline on your side.
Please.
Of the globe.
Well, I'm in Southern California, and I can go to Northern California in a moment's notice. So you and I, we're easy to get together. It's Grant that's over somewhere in the bad part of the country. All right, let me roll these credits. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.